Thank you for talking to N1. Luxembourg is one of the countries which implemented the large-scale testing strategy. The highest number of tests per person was conducted here. That's why you were praised by ECDC besides others. Are you satisfied with the outcome, and why did you turn to that strategy at first place?
Well, I think that at the onset of the pandemic we knew very little about the virus. It was clear that the distinguishing characteristic of COVID is that it is the asymptomatic who are infectious as well. Normally when you're looking at a pandemic, you have people that are sick, you try to contain these, you try to test them and isolate them, which however in this pandemic is not easy at all, as the asymptomatic are infectious. So it was obvious that knowing very little about the virus, the part that we did know mandated that we simply had to be able to also find those who are infectious while being asymptomatic, and that led to large-scale testing.
So are you satisfied with the outcome?
Well, I think that the outcome now is that we are relieved to see that when there has been a stress test now, and one can clearly say that the start of a second wave with close to logarithmic increases in infections, that in this stress test the strategy held. That means that we have been able to break the infection chains and very effectively trace those who are positive, isolate them, and thus now, last 2 weeks, the numbers stabilized at a very high level. They didn't increase then further, and now they're coming down. So it means that the strategy is working, and it is working, if you so want, under stress, under fire, and it's a huge relief for the country, for us.
On the other hand, you had a high number of detected infections as well. Luxembourg has been criticized for that and is blacklisted by several EU countries. Having that in mind, do you think the strategy is the right one? Did Luxembourg, let's say, suffer because of this strategy?
Well, in a way we did. And now because I think all of the assessments are simply comparing. And the cutoffs that were set, for example, by the Ulf Nehrbass Institute, they are cutoffs that are becoming very meaningful if you're not testing sufficiently. That means that you're only getting a fraction of those who actually are infected. And then a number of 50, for example, would be very significant. However, if you see everybody, then of course this would have to be put into context. And we try to do that. We try to convince the Ulf Nehrbass Institute and the ECDC that you cannot just put numbers next to each other. Would mean you're comparing apples and oranges. There was some openness to the argument, but at the end, Luxembourg still is blacklisted. I think this will now change in the coming days.
The large-scale testing strategy draws a lot of criticism because those quick tests are believed to be unreliable, that there are many false negative or false positive tests. What is your experience regarding this controversy?
There's a lot of discussion on that, and I think that it is right for people to be concerned about these things. But if you have a diagnosis and it is negative, you would like to rely on it. What I can tell you is that there has been an evolution. The testing is one of the biggest shared scientific efforts that I've seen, where throughout the world scientists have been working very rapidly in order to improve the methodology and the techniques. So while at the very beginning, the first cases in China, there was a reasonably high false negative rate, this has basically disappeared. So now the tests that we are now conducting, there is no visible false negativity. These tests are so sensitive that people that were positive once often remain positive over very long periods of time, because 2 copies of a viral genome, fragments thereof, are detectable in the meantime. So I think that we can reassure people that both false negatives and false positives are simply not visible in the routine. Nobody can exclude that, but it is not a factor that we have to we don't have to factor that in as we're moving forward. This is basically under control.
So there is a second wave of infection. What are its characteristics and what are the differences between the first and second wave? How long can all this last?
Well, the waves, I mean, this is a definition which is rather, well, there's semantics in there involved, of course. Now, the first wave simply is considered over after the infection rates were extremely low. So there was no, when we look at we had a study here that looked at the prevalence within the country. It's called Convince, and we had a prevalence of 0.07%. There were a couple of hundred people that may have still carried the virus, but the pandemic was completely under control. And the second wave is starting when you do have, of course, a pandemic dynamic that starts to enter into lock phases where people really start infecting each other at high rates. We had an RF value of well above 1.5 here in Luxembourg. I think that the difference was the people that were driving that. The first wave was carried in largely through ski holidays, so there was a different part of society. The second wave now is rather younger people who, well, were a little robust maybe in the way they partied, and so there is a difference. Now, the numbers of the second wave, I think the absolute numbers were relatively high, but the structure, the age structure of the infected is younger in the bulk, and you have to, however, understand that then the pandemic slowly eats itself through the age groups and arrives again at the more high risk, at the elder, through the family structures, right? But we are not there yet. So this means that there are younger people, there are relatively less hospitalizations, and we have a very low number of deaths. I can't even tell you how high the number is right now, 1 or 2 is, but it's maybe not the most up to date, but a very, very low death rate. And we have in Europe by far the lowest case mortality rate, which is, I think, below 2%.
Talking about the first and second wave, will there be a third one or the extension of the current one? Having in mind that the school year is about to start, kids will go back to their classrooms, also people will come back from summer vacations. Is there an increased danger of mass infections again?
I mean, I think that we are preparing for this now. When you're looking at the board behind me, we are just trying to put together all of the risk groups that will hit us, that travelers. Of course, we were testing now people who were trying to leave the country because obviously Luxembourg was blacklisted, so lots of tests had to be done for people wanting to leave the country, but we will have to offer testing for those who come back from vacation. That means that everybody who wants to get tested will get tested. We will have up to 2,000 slots a day just for that. We are looking at schools. We want to have a full testing of schools. And so, I mean, there are various aspects that we try to cover in order to catch a wave. We do think that whether now that is a continuation of the second or we call it a third wave, well, don't nail me on that. But whatever will be a pickup in the pandemic dynamics come September, we'll try to catch that through tracing and through testing, and that's what we prepare for.
All this will eventually end since the vaccine and the cure are discovered. We have heard the first announcements of the vaccine that came from Russia. What is your opinion about it, and does it sound reliable to you?
Yeah, well, I cross my fingers. I hope that the Russian effort will be successful. We will see that, I suppose, very soon, but not far behind. There are others. I think AstraZeneca, together with Oxford University, is far ahead. There are 2 outfits in Germany, I think, that are going into clinical phases now. Well, if it all works, then I do think that, well, next summer we could all be vaccinated if it works, but we will see how the clinical phases fare. However, I do think that now we have established a process, and I could almost say a routine here in Luxembourg, that we can manage. Now, people understand that testing is working. They understand that it is important, and they're showing up for the test. The tests are pain-free. They work fairly well from all I can see. And we have established a routine that allows us to stabilize the situation, even in the absence of a vaccine. And that's still very important. I mean, I think that you have the influenza wave coming. You have winter coming. You have more activity in closed rooms. So whoever is watching this, please make sure that if you get an invitation, get tested. It really does work. It's the best contribution you can do to your family, your community, and as well, Luxembourg, your country.
Being a scientist, do you trust the vaccine made in any country in such a short time? Is it enough time for the vaccine to be fully tested and safe?
So the type of vaccine that is being used there, and you correct me, I have not looked into it in detail, but in the meantime, you can actually, instead of taking an attenuated virus or an inactivated virus, you can just take the genetic code for a specific viral protein, where you think it's very antigenic. That means that the body is able to rather effectively develop antibodies against that protein. So that means that a coding bit of sequence is injected directly into the muscle. And so it's the body that is producing this viral protein, which is of course not infectious at all, and thus triggers the production of antibodies. If that strategy is working, that means if the protein and the folding of the protein, one calls that the epitopes, if they're antigenic, if they provoke the immune system in the right way, it can be extremely fast. It can be extremely fast, and I think that the number of potential side effects, they are still possible, but they are limited in numbers. Can you do it safely in a short time? Yeah, of course you can. I mean, if you have enough volunteers, on one hand, I mean, a problem would have been at the end of the first wave, do you have enough people where there is a potential infection? So, I mean, can you actually gauge, can you measure the protective effect of such a vaccine? But there again, I think in the US you have an incredibly dynamic pandemic development, so I think there are enough people that could be registered in a clinical trial in order to assess that now very accurately. It will take months to do it, but I think it can be done safely within this period.
So the first vaccine is on its way. Even the president of Serbia, the country which I come from, announced that the vaccine in Serbia will be available this autumn. Is it too optimistic or pretty realistic?
Various countries have embarked on various initiatives. There's a European initiative, there is a Gavi initiative, England is very much involved in it, there may be others, there may be the Russian initiative. And I think that the countries that are engaged, they probably have privy information, maybe they have a better insight into where this stands. I think expecting a vaccine this fall, it's optimistic, but it's possible. I would be rather cautious because even after the clinical trials have occurred, it has to be produced, the vaccine has to be produced, the doses have to be distributed, and then you have to put in place an infrastructure to actually vaccinate people to that scale. I mean, that's a challenge in itself. So I think here, if everything is working, I would optimistically assume for Luxembourg Q1 next year, maybe Q2, but maybe it is possible faster. I'm sure there are people who know that better than I do.
You said you expect the Luxembourg residents to be vaccinated at this time next year. Does that mean the epidemic will end then, and can you expect to live a normal life again from next September?
You have to retain a healthy sense of optimism. Now, I wouldn't know why not. I mean, if you ask me as a scientist, there are certain scenarios where you could imagine why a vaccine may not work, or why there are certain risks involved with a vaccine. But these questions, these open questions, they will be addressed very soon, and we will have answers, and I hope them to be positive. And should they be positive, then next summer this will be history. It will be an episode, but it will be an episode that hopefully we will have learned from, because this is not the last virus that's going to hit a connected world. And pandemic preparedness is something that we will have to put on the front burner. We'll have to think about it more so that we don't get taken by surprise the way it happened now with COVID.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.